They tell me you are the cleverest woman in 3 counties, the Duke of Fairmount said, without turning his head. And yet here you stand in a doorway, spying on your betters like a kitchen maid. Adrian Crane had not expected an answer. Men and women alike went pale when he spoke to them in that flat, bored voice, and the wise ones found somewhere else to be. So when the answer came light, unhurried, entirely unafraid, he was obliged, against every instinct of a lifetime, to turn and look. "You mistake me, your grace," she said. "I was not spying. I was deciding whether the room was worth entering. I have concluded that it is not, and yet here I remain, which tells you a great deal about the quality of my judgment tonight." She was nobody. That was his first, cool assessment. A young woman in a gown 2 seasons out of fashion, the silk gone slightly soft at the seams from too many pressings, her dark hair pinned with more determination than skill, so that one curl had already worked itself loose against her cheek. She held a glass of ratafia she plainly had no intention of drinking, and she looked at him, the Duke of Fairmount, before whom marquesses had been known to lose their power of speech, though he were a mildly interesting picture hung a little crooked on the wall. "You know who I am," he said. "Everyone in this house knows who you are. You have been announced twice, once by the footman and once by the collective, indrawn breath of every mother with a daughter to marry." She tilted her head. "You did not enjoy it. I watched your jaw. It went hard just there, when Lady Comstock's girl was steered into your path. You disliked being hunted." Adrian was aware in a distant way that he ought to have been affronted. He was a man who cultivated affront the way a men cultivated gardens. It kept people at the correct distance. Instead, he found himself faintly, dangerously curious. "And you," he said, "you are not hunting. I have no daughter to marry, and I am far too poor to be a prize and far too plain to be a temptation, so no, I am not hunting. I am observing. It is cheaper and considerably more amusing." She raised the untouched glass a half-inch, a mockery of a toast. "You, your grace, are the most amusing thing in the room, which is a low bar, but you clear it handsomely." This was Ravensworth Hall, on the night of the Ravensworth ball. In the 3rd week of a wet and reluctant spring, and Adrian Crane, 5th Duke of Fairmount, had come here for one reason only, because his aunt, the Dowager Countess of Selwood, had trapped him into it with the particular ruthlessness of a woman who considered his continued bachelorhood a personal insult. He had meant to stand for 1 hour against a wall, refuse every introduction with the minimum of courtesy required to remain a gentleman, and leave. He had not meant to be caught in a doorway trading words with a girl whose name he did not know. "You have not asked my name," he observed. "I have not," she agreed. "You will tell me if you wish me to have it. Names are a currency, and you strike me as a man who is careful with what he spends." "Beatrice Merryweather." A new voice, warm, faintly scandalized, and a stout, kindly-faced woman bore down upon them through the crowd with the inexorability of a laden barge. "There you are, you wicked creature, I have been—" "Oh." The woman stopped short, took in the Duke, and executed a curtsy so deep and so flustered that she nearly overbalanced. "Your grace, I do beg your pardon. My niece has a way of, that is, she does not always." "Aunt Prudence," the young woman said gently, "you are about to apologize for me, and I would much rather you did not, because I have said nothing that requires it. So, Beatrice Merryweather." Adrian filed the name away with the small, precise motion of a man locking a drawer. "A niece of no fortune, then dependent on an aunt of modest means, one of the invisible women who furnished the edges of every ballroom in England, the ones who fetched shawls and turned pages and were spoken over, spoken past, and never spoken to." "Your niece," he said to the aunt, and watched Beatrice Merryweather's chin lift a fraction, bracing for whatever cruelty was coming, "has been telling me that this room is not worth entering. I find I am inclined to agree with her. It is the first sensible thing anyone has said to me all evening." The aunt blinked, uncertain whether she had been mocked or reprieved. Beatrice, he noted, was not uncertain at all. Something flickered behind her eyes, not triumph, nothing so vulgar, but a kind of recalculation, as though she had set him down as one sum and now found she must work him again. "High praise," Beatrice said, "from a man who has, by my count, said no more than 9 words to anyone here who was not myself. I am flattered, your grace, though I suspect you would be flattering to a fence-post if the fence-post declined to marry you." Beatrice, the aunt, faint with mortification. It is quite all right, madam. Adrian did not smile. He had trained the expression out of himself years ago, the way a soldier trains out flinching. But something moved in his chest that had not moved in a long while, some small, rusted mechanism turning over. Your niece and I understand one another. We are both here against our will, and we are both determined to enjoy the injury of it. Are we not, Miss Merriweather? We are, your grace. She met his eyes squarely. Though I enjoy it rather more cheaply than you do, since my carriage cost nothing and I owe no one an heir. That, he thought, was a hit. A clean one, delivered without malice, which made it land the harder. The matter of the heir, the entail, the dukedom passing sideways to his cousin Julian if he died without a son, the whole grinding weight of Fairmount's future resting on his single, unmarried person was the precise thing his aunt had dragged him here to remedy. And this penniless girl in her twice-turned gown had put her finger on it inside of 5 minutes, and had done it lightly as one flicks lint from a sleeve. He should have been angry. He realized, with something close to alarm, entertained. The orchestra struck up in the long gallery beyond, the first bars of a country dance sighing thinly across the murmur of the crowd, and Aunt Prudence seized the moment as a drowning woman seizes a spar. The dancing is beginning, your grace, and I am sure you have a great many, that is, I shall take my niece and trouble you no further. You will not, Adrian said, and was mildly surprised to hear himself say it. I have not finished being amused. He did not stay long. That was the thing he told himself afterward, riding back through the black wet lanes toward the townhouse, the carriage lamps swinging their small yellow lights across the hedgerows. He had exchanged perhaps a quarter-hour of words with a girl of no consequence, had refused to dance with anyone, had endured his aunt's pointed silences and had gone. It signified nothing. Beatrice Merriweather was a clever, poor, unremarkable young woman whom he would in all likelihood never see again, and it was better so, because clever people were tiresome and poor people wanted things, and he had spent 38 years arranging his life so that neither could reach him. And yet the whole of the drive home he found himself hearing her again. You would be flattering to a fence post if the fence post declined to marry you. No one spoke to him so. No one had spoken to him so since he was a boy, before the title, before his father died and the great cold machine of the dukedom closed over him and made of him a thing that people feared. Fear, he had learned early, was cleaner than affection. Fear kept its distance. Fear did not sit up with you at your father's deathbed and then, when the dying was done and the crying finished, quietly go about the business of taking everything you had. He had built himself out of that lesson, brick by cold brick. And a girl in a ballroom doorway had looked at the whole edifice and been, quite plainly, unimpressed. You seem, said his aunt, seated across from him in the swaying dark, almost human this evening. It is disconcerting. I had grown used to escorting a very well-dressed suit of armor. I am tired, aunt. You are nothing of the kind. You were rude to everyone, which is your custom, and then you were not rude to precisely one person, which is not. The Merriweather girl. The Dowager Countess of Selwood was 70 years old, sharp as a paper's edge, and entirely without mercy where her nephew's happiness was concerned. I know the aunt slightly. Prudence Merriweather, clergyman's widow, respectable and poor as a church mouse. The girl was to have had a small portion, but her father Prudence's brother speculated it away and then had the taste to die of the shame, leaving her nothing but her wits. Then she's well provided for, Adrian said. She has a great many. Adrian, his aunt leaned forward, and the passing lamplight caught the shrewd bright eyes so like his own. Do not what? Do not do the thing you are about to do. I have watched you these 15 years turn every softness in yourself to stone, because once, when you were too young to defend it, softness cost you. I have watched you frighten away every woman of feeling and marry none of the fortune hunters, and I have made a kind of peace with the notion that you will die alone and leave Fairmount to that dreadful cousin Julian, who will gamble the roof off the hall inside a 12-month. She sat back. But do not toy with a poor girl who has nothing to lose but her dignity, and who, from the sound of her, has kept that dignity by main force against a world that would strip it from her. If you cannot mean it, leave her be. Adrian said nothing. He looked out at the dark rushing hedgerows and did not answer, because the honest answer that he had not the smallest idea whether he could mean it. that the machine of him had rusted over so completely he no longer knew what lay beneath was not one he could bring himself to say aloud. He did not intend to see Beatrice Merryweather again. He was quite certain of it. He was, as it happened, entirely wrong. Ravensworth Hall belonged to Lord Ravensworth, a man of ancient name and modern debts, and his wife the Countess, who had two ambitions in life, to marry off her 3 daughters, and to be seen to know everyone worth knowing. It was the second ambition that undid Adrian's resolve, for the Countess had discovered that the Duke of Fairmount had, for the first time in living memory, deigned to speak civilly to a guest at one of her entertainments, and she meant to have him back. The invitation to the house party arrived within the week. A fortnight in the country, riding in cards and dancing, the great and the good of the county gathered under one leaking gilded roof, and the Countess was careful to mention in her looping ambitious hand Miss Prudence Merryweather, and her niece already engaged to attend. Adrian read the invitation twice. Then he set it down on the breakfast table and looked for a long moment at nothing at all. He should refuse. Every rule he had ever made for himself said refuse. A fortnight in a house with a girl who saw straight through him was not amusement. It was hazard, and a man who had spent his life fortifying against hazard did not walk into it with his eyes open for the pleasure of a few sharp words from a penniless clergyman's niece. "You are going," said his aunt from the far end of the table, not looking up from her chocolate. It was not a question. "I have not said so." "You have a letter from Adelaide Ravensworth in your hand, and an expression on your face I have not seen since you were 9 years old, and someone had left the paddock open. You are going." She turned a page of her correspondence. "I shall come as well, to lend you countenance and to prevent you from being unforgivably rude to our hostess, and to see," she added, with the air of a woman laying down a card she has been holding a very long time, "what a clever poor girl makes of you, my dear. I confess I am curious." So it was that a fortnight later the great black travelling carriage of the Dukes of Fairmount, with its silver crest upon the door, came grinding up the long avenue of Ravensworth Hall through an afternoon of thin bright April sun, and Adrian Crane, who had arranged his entire life to want nothing he could not command, sat within it and felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, something perilously like anticipation. He told himself it was the shooting. There was said to be excellent shooting. He was lying, and some cold part of him knew it, and that part watched the approaching house with a worriness it had not felt in years, because Adrian Crane had walked willingly toward exactly 2 dangerous things in his life. The first had been his father's deathbed. He did not care to name what the second might turn out to be. He found her on the first morning in the library. He had not gone looking for her. He wished that to be understood, chiefly by himself. He had risen early, as was his habit, and gone down through the sleeping house in search of a room where he might be alone with a book and the smell of old paper and no one to require conversation of him, and there she was, curled in the deep window seat with her stockinged feet under her and a great calf-bound volume open across her knees, so lost in it that she did not hear the door. Adrian stood in the doorway and watched her for the length of a slow breath. The morning light came in low and gold across the frost-silvered lawn beyond the glass and lay along the curve of her cheek, and she was frowning slightly at whatever she read, her lips moving faintly over the words, and she looked not plain. He revised the assessment of that first night with the cold honesty he brought to all his ledgers. Not plain at all, merely unadorned, which the fashionable world confused with the same thing. There was a keenness to her face, an aliveness, no amount of good dressing could have bought, and no amount of shabby dressing could hide. "You are reading Herodotus," he had, "in the original Greek. That is either an affectation or a scandal, and I cannot at this hour decide which." She did not startle. That was the second thing he noticed about her, after the first thing, which was that she was quicker than nearly anyone he had ever met. She looked up, unhurried, and marked her place with one finger. "Neither," she said. "My father, before he ruined us and died, believed that a daughter with no fortune had better have an education, since it was the one thing his creditors could not seize. He taught me Greek and Latin and a great deal of geometry, and the conviction that a woman who can amuse herself will never be at the mercy of a man who bores her. It has proved," she added, the most useful inheritance imaginable, since it costing to maintain and no one can take it away. And does it work? Adrian came into the room. He told himself he was merely fetching a book. Are you never at the mercy of a man who bores you? I am at present, she said, at the mercy of a man who does not bore me in the slightest, which is far more dangerous. So I shall thank you to bore me at once, your grace, out of consideration for my peace of mind. He should have left. He was aware of the door behind him, and of the sleeping house, and of every rule. He crossed instead to the shelf nearest her window and made a show of studying the spines, and said, I am told I am a very dull man, cold, proud, unpleasant. Ask anyone at this house party. They will tell you at length, provided you catch them before I enter the room. They are wrong, Beatrice said. He turned. Not about the proud, she went on, watching him with those disconcerting clear eyes. You are the proudest man I have ever met, and I have met a bishop. But the cold is a costume. You put it on the way I put on my mother's old pearls, because it is what I have, and because it keeps people from seeing what I lack. Your coldness keeps people from seeing what you lack too. I only wonder what that is. The room was very quiet. Somewhere far off in the house a servant dropped something and swore, and a clock ticked, and the frost on the lawn began imperceptibly to burn away in the strengthening sun. And Adrian Crane stood among the shelves of another man's library and felt the ground shift very slightly beneath a life he had believed unshakable. You presume a great deal, he said, and his voice came out lower than he intended. On a fortnight's acquaintance and a quarter hour in a doorway. I do, she agreed, entirely unrepentant. It is my besetting sin. My aunt prays over it. But you began it. Your grace, you presume to call me a spinster spying in a doorway, and I have merely returned the presumption with interest, which is only fair, and a great deal more honest than the alternative, which is that we should stand here trading pleasantries about the weather, like two people who have not each already decided the other is worth the trouble of being rude to. And have you decided that I am worth the trouble? She was silent a moment. Something crossed her face that he could not read a weariness, perhaps a girl who had learned young to be careful of hoping, catching herself in the act. I have decided, she said carefully, that you are the most interesting problem I have encountered in some years, and that a poor woman with a great deal of leisure and no fortune must take her amusements where she finds them. That is not the same thing. No, Adrian said, it is not. He selected a book at random. It turned out later to be a treatise on the drainage of Fenland, which he never read, and bowed to her, correct and cool, and took himself out of the library before he could do or say any of the several unwise things that were pressing at the back of his throat. And all that day, through the shooting and the cold luncheon laid out in the game larder and the interminable evening of cards, he found his eye drawn again and again across whatever room to the slight figure in the twice-turned gowns, the girl no one else troubled to look at, who alone in that whole glittering feathered company had told him to his face that his coldness was a costume. It became a kind of war. He did not decide it should. It simply became one, over the following days, the way weather becomes a storm, a pressure building, a charge in the air. They circled each other through the long green idle hours of the house party, and wherever they met, in the shrubbery walk, at the breakfast table, in the drawing room after dinner when the older ladies dozed and the young ones played at spillikins, they fought, beautifully, without quarter. She would say something outrageous and true, and he would answer it, and she would answer that, and the words would fly between them faster and faster like a rally at battledore, until one of them landed a hit clean enough to make the other pause. And then this was the thing. This was the thing he could not account for. Then they would both very nearly laugh. Adrian Crane had not very nearly laughed in a decade. You accuse me of arrogance, he said to her on the fourth day in the walled garden, where he had certainly not gone in the hope of finding her, and where she had certainly not gone in the hope of being found. Yet you are the most arrogant creature I have ever encountered. You have not a shilling to your name, and you carry yourself like a queen in exile. That is precisely what I am, she said, cutting a rose she had no business cutting, since it was the Countess's rose and not hers. A queen in exile has lost her kingdom, but not her right to it. I have lost my fortune, but not my sense of my own worth, which was never contingent on the fortune in the first place. You, on the other hand, she pointed the rose at him like a small pink accusation, have never lost anything, and so you have never had to discover what you are worth without it. That is the difference between us, your grace. I know exactly what I am worth. You have not the faintest idea what you are worth, and it terrifies you, which is why you are so very careful never to be in a position where anyone might tell you. He took the rose from her hand. He did not know why he did it. His gloved fingers closed over the stem beside hers, careful of the thorns, and for a moment they both held it, and neither let go, and the walled garden was full of bees, and the smell of turned earth, and the small green sound of things growing. And Adrian looked at Beatrice Merryweather, and felt the whole cold architecture of himself groan under a weight it had never been built to bear. You are wrong, he said quietly. There is a great deal I have lost. Then tell me, she said, and for the first time all fortnight there was no fight in it, only that low and unguarded. Then tell me. He did not. He let go of the rose and stepped back and put the cold costume on again with an almost audible effort. And he said something dry and cutting about the Countess's gardener and the theft of ducal roses, and Beatrice let him, watching him retreat behind his walls with an expression that was not triumph and not disappointment, but something graver than either, and the moment passed. But it had happened. That was the trouble. It had happened, and they both knew it had happened, and neither could unhappen it. Somewhere in the walled garden, over a stolen rose, the game had stopped being entirely a game. His aunt saw it, of course. His aunt saw everything. You are not well, she informed him that evening, running him to ground in the billiard room where he had gone to be alone with a cue and his thoughts. You have the look of a man sickening for something. I have seen it before, though not in you. Your late uncle had it, and it carried him off within the year. And what is it, this fatal complaint? Feeling, said the Dowager Countess of Selwood. You are coming down with a bad case of feeling, my dear, and at your age and after so long an immunity I fear it may go very hard with you indeed. She settled into a chair by the fire and regarded him with the fond ruthlessness that had characterized their relations since he was in short coats. The girl is remarkable. I have made her acquaintance properly. She is clever and poor and proud and entirely without design. Do you understand me, Adrian? Entirely without design. She wants nothing from you. She has decided, I think, that wanting anything from you would be a kind of surrender, and she would rather die than surrender. I have not met her equal in 50 years. A pause. Which is exactly why you must be careful, because a girl like that can be broken once, badly, and never mended, and you are precisely the man to do it, not from cruelty, but from cowardice. You will get frightened and you will retreat behind your title, and you will crush her without meaning to, the way a man crushes a moth against a lamp he did not know was lit. Adrian bent over the table and made his shot. It went wide. He straightened and looked at the balls scattered across the green baize, and did not look at his aunt. Then perhaps, he said, the wisest course is to end it, to leave tomorrow. To go back to Fairmount and my ledgers and my very well-arranged solitude, and to let Miss Merryweather find her amusements elsewhere, among men who will not crush her. That would be the wisest course. His aunt agreed. It would also be the most cowardly, and cowardice is the one sin I have never once known you to commit, whatever your other faults. You have never run from anything in your life, Adrian. Not your father's dying, not the debts he left, not the whole weight of Fairmount at 24. It would be a great pity to begin now, over a girl in a mended gown who has more courage in her little finger than most of this house has in its whole preening self. He did not leave the next day. He told himself he stayed for the shooting. The house party rolled on toward its climax, which was to be a grand ball, the Ravensworth Ballper, the county event, half the neighborhood invited, the great gallery cleared and waxed, and the chandeliers let down and refilled with 100 pounds of wax candles that Lord Ravensworth could ill afford and his wife would not do without. And it was to this ball, 3 nights hence, that Adrian's whole strange fortnight had been quietly, invisibly bending, though he did not yet know it. And it was at this ball that he would say the 6 words that would change the course of both their lives, and mean them, God help him, entirely. The rain came on the 5th day, and shut the house party indoors, and Adrian discovered that a wet day at a country house is a crucible in which characters are either polished or dissolved. He had thought himself proof against boredom. He had spent a lifetime cultivating the private resources of a man who did not much like company. But a whole afternoon penned up with 40 idle people, and the rain drumming on the long windows was a trial even to his fortitude, and he found himself, more and more as the grey hours wore on, drifting toward the one person in the house whose company did not exhaust him. She was in the small saloon that gave off the library, teaching 2 of the Ravensworth daughters a card game of some complexity, and Adrian stood in the connecting doorways. He was coming to feel where he and Beatrice Merryweather were fated to meet and listen to her, unobserved, for the space of several minutes. "No," she was saying, patient and merry. "You have played the knave too soon, Amelia, which is the commonest error and the most human, because the knave is a bold-looking card and one longs to be doing something with it. But the whole art of the game is in the holding back. The player who wins is not the one with the best cards. It is the one who can bear to wait longest before she plays them. Now try again, and this time do nothing until you cannot help it. Do nothing until you cannot help it." Adrian, watching from the doorway, felt the words go into him sideways, as her words had a way of doing. It was, he reflected, precisely the game he and she had been playing for 5 days, 2 players, each with a strong hand, each refusing to lead, each waiting to see what the other would be forced to reveal, and he wondered, not for the first time, whether she knew she was describing them, and concluded, looking at the small private curve at the corner of her mouth, that of course she did. She knew everything. It was the most maddening and the most delightful thing about her. "You are lurking again, Your Grace," she said, without looking up. "You do a great deal of lurking in doorways. It is a very ducal habit, all threshold, no commitment. One is never sure whether you mean to come in or to have the room cleared. I was admiring your teaching," Adrian said, coming in. "You have a gift for it. Did you never think of it as a profession, a governess of your talents?" He saw the shot go home the instant it left him, and would have given a good deal to recall it. It was not cruelly meant. It was merely careless, the careless cruelty of a man to whom the difference between a governess and a duchess was an abstraction. But to Beatrice Merryweather, 29 and portionless, the post of governess was not an abstraction. It was the precise and looming fate that Sir Marcus Vane had named over the port companion to some old woman. Governess, the grey respectable servitude that waited for a poor gentlewoman when the balls stopped inviting her, and Adrian had just thoughtlessly held it up before the 2 Ravensworth girls as her natural calling. The girls mercifully understood nothing. But Beatrice understood, and her hands went still on the cards, and she looked up at him at last with an expression he had not seen from her before, not wit, not armour, but a flat wariness, as of a woman reminded, in the middle of a rare bright hour, exactly where she stood. "I have thought of it a great deal, Your Grace," she said quietly. "It is, in point of fact, the most likely course my life will take once my aunt can no longer keep me, which will not be many years now. I shall be a governess or a companion, and I shall teach other women's daughters to play cards and speak French and hold their tongues, and I shall be grateful for the place, and I shall grow old in other people's houses, in the small cold rooms at the top of the stairs where such women are lodged. It is not a thing I like to be reminded of on a wet afternoon, but it was kindly meant, I am sure. You could not know." And she gathered up the cards and excused herself gently to the girls, and went out, not in a temper which he could have borne, but with a quiet dignity that was infinitely worse, and left Adrian standing in the little saloon with the rain on the glass and the sour taste of his own thoughtlessness in his mouth. He found her an hour later. He had gone looking this time. He had abandoned the pretense of not looking. She was in the library, of course, in the window seat, watching the rain, and she did not tell him to go away, which he took as more than he deserved. "I owe you an apology," he said, and sat down the far end of the window seat again, the arm's length that was always between them. "I have offended you, and I did it stupidly, which is worse than doing it on purpose, because a man who offends on purpose at least knows what he is about. I forget, Miss Merryweather. That is my failing. I forget that words which cost me nothing may cost another person a great deal, because I have lived my whole life in a place where words cost nothing, where the ground under my feet is so solid I have never once had to think about it. You live on different ground. I forget that, and I trample it, and I am sorry." She was quiet a moment. Then, slowly, the wariness went out of her, and something rueful came in its place. She said, "Is a remarkably handsome apology, Your Grace. I did not think you had it in you. Most men of your rank, when they tread on a poor woman, either do not notice or expect her to be flattered by the weight of the boot." She turned from the rain to look at him. "You noticed, and you are sorry. I confess I do not know quite what to do with a duke who is sorry. It is not a specimen I have encountered in the wild. I am told," Adrian said, "that I am something of a rare specimen in a number of respects. My aunt keeps a list." "Does she?" Beatrice's mouth curved. "I should like to see this list." "You would not. It is very long and very frank, and I come out of it badly." He watched the rain. "May I ask you something, and will you answer it honestly, even if the honest answer is unkind?" "I find I would rather have your unkind honesty than any other person's flattery, which is a strange thing to discover about oneself, and I am still becoming used to it. You may ask." "I make no promises about the answer. I am honest by temperament, not by resolution, which means it comes out whether I will it or not, generally at the worst possible moment." "When you look at me," Adrian said, "what do you see? Not the Duke, not the cold man everyone sees. You told me the first night that my coldness was a costume. I have been wondering ever since unwisely, at some cost to my sleep, what you think is underneath it, what you see when you look past the costume. I ask because no one has looked past it in 14 years, and I have half forgotten there is anything there to see, and I find I should very much like to know what remains." The rain fell. Beatrice Merryweather regarded him for a long moment across the window seat, with the grave keen attention she gave to Greek and to card games and to problems worth the solving, and when she answered she did not answer lightly. "I see a boy," she said, "who was frightened once badly a long time ago, and who has been frightened ever since, and who has built a very great and very cold and very impressive house to live in so that no one will ever be able to frighten him again. And I see that the house has worked. No one can reach you, no one can hurt you, you are perfectly safe. And I see that you are the loneliest person I have ever met, and that the safety has cost you everything it was meant to protect, and that some part of you knows it. And that this is why you cannot stop lurking in doorways, because you want, more than you will ever admit, for someone to come and knock, and you have made yourself so terrible that no one dares. And so you wait in the doorway between the cold house and the warm room, belonging to neither. Wanting the warm room with your whole starved heart, and too proud and too frightened to walk into it." She paused. "That is what I see, Your Grace. You asked for the unkind honesty. There it is. I hope you can sleep." Adrian Crane did not answer for a long time. The rain ran down the glass. The grey light moved on the shelves, and somewhere in his chest the old rusted mechanism that had turned over the first night in the ballroom doorway turned over again, further this time, past a point from which he understood there would be no going back. "No," he said at last, very quietly, "I do not expect I shall sleep at all." And Beatrice, watching him, seemed to understand what she had done, that she had reached past the costume and touched the man, the actual, living, frightened man, that no one had touched in 14 years, and something crossed her own face that was almost fear. The fear of a person who has been careful all her life and feels the ground beginning to shift beneath her too. "We are neither of us being careful," she said, half to herself. "We ought to be careful. You are a duke and I am a governess in waiting, and this, whatever this is, these doorways and these honesties, this can only end one way, Your Grace, and it is not a way that is kind to me. I should stop, I know I should stop, and yet here I sit. Here you sit," Adrian agreed, "and here I sit. And the rain does not look like stopping." He rose, because if he did not rise he would do something irrevocable, and it was not yet time. Some instinct told him it was not yet time. "Play cards with me this evening, Miss Merryweather. In front of everyone, quite properly, with your aunt watching and the whole party for chaperone. I should like to see whether you play as well as you teach. I warn you, I am accounted very good." "You are accounted very good at everything," she said, "which is precisely the trouble with you. And I shall take enormous pleasure in beating you, and I intend to do it by doing nothing until I cannot help it." The wit was back, the armor was back, but underneath it, just visible, was the thing that had shifted and would not shift back. "Go away now, Your Grace." I have a great deal of thinking to do, and I cannot do it with you lurking, and none of the thinking is going to be the least bit sensible, and I blame you entirely." He went, and that evening they played cards, and she beat him soundly twice, doing nothing until she could not help it. And the whole party watched the cold Duke of Fairmount lose to the penniless Merryweather girl and laugh about it, laugh out loud twice, and the rumor that would follow him to London began that night, its long journey out into the world. The complication arrived as complications so often do, in a well-cut coat and a splendid pair of whiskers. His name was Sir Marcus Vane, a baronet of comfortable means and colossal self-regard, and he had come to the Ravensworth house party for the express purpose of securing a wife, having decided at 40 and after a life of sporting bachelorhood that it was time. He was not an evil man. Adrian, watching him across the drawing-room on the night of his arrival, made that assessment with the same cold accuracy he brought to everything and found it, unfortunately, correct. Vane was not cruel. He was merely stupid, and stupidity in a man of means is its own kind of hazard. And he had decided within a day of arriving that Miss Beatrice Merryweather would do very well. "She's poor, of course," Vane confided to Adrian over the port, in the loud, confiding manner of a man who assumed all other men shared his views because he could not imagine any other views existing. "No portion at all, I'm told. But a fellow in my position don't need the money, and she's a taking little thing, sharp as a needle, keep a man's table lively, and grateful, that's the thing, Fairmount. A poor girl's grateful. You marry an heiress, she thinks she's done you the favor. You raise a girl like this out of genteel poverty, she knows who's master. Worth a good deal, that, to a man who values a quiet house." Adrian set down his glass with great care, because the alternative was to break the stem of it. "You have spoken to her?" he asked. His voice was perfectly level. Years of practice had made it so. "Not yet means to, at the ball. Ask her for the first 2 dances, make my intentions plain, have it settled before we all scatter home. No sense in shilly-shallying. A poor girl in her situation ain't going to say no to a baronet, is she?" Vane laughed, comfortable, secure, and reached again for the decanter. "Between you and me, Fairmount, it's a kindness. Girl like that, no fortune, no beauty to speak of, what's her prospect otherwise? Companion to some old woman, governess. I'm the best thing that'll ever happen to her, and she'll know it, and we'll rub along famously." He drank. "You're not thinking of her yourself, I hope? Huh? No, a duke, she'd not aim so high, and you'd not aim so low. We're safe from each other there, eh?" Adrian did not answer. He was thinking, with a cold clarity that frightened him a little, of exactly how easy it would be to make Sir Marcus Vane profoundly unhappy, and of how little he cared, this precise moment, for the ruin of his own equanimity that the thought represented. "You'd not aim so low." The words sat in him like a swallowed stone, for that was the thing, was it not? That was the thing he had been circling for a fortnight and refusing to name. He was a duke, and she was a clergyman's penniless niece, and between them yawned a gulf that the whole apparatus of English society existed to keep unbridged. A duke did not marry a Beatrice Merryweather. A duke married a woman with land to join to his land, and a name to lend to his name, and a fortune to shore up the endless hungry maw of Fairmount, its tenants and its roofs and its dependents and its debts. His father had married so. His grandfather had married so. It was not a preference. It was a duty bred into the bone, and Adrian had never in his life questioned it, because he had never in his life met anyone who made him wish to. And now here was Sir Marcus Vane, over the port, proposing to raise Beatrice out of poverty as one might raise a promising under-gardener, in exchange for her lifelong gratitude, and calling it a kindness. And the worst of it, the truly unbearable worst of it, was that by every measure the world recognized, Vane was right. It was the best thing that would ever happen to her. A baronet's wife, a comfortable house, security, respectability, an end to the twice-turned gowns and the borrowed roses and the perpetual small humiliations of genteel poverty. A sensible woman would take it and be glad. Beatrice Merryweather, Adrian thought, would take it, if it were offered, and be glad, because she was not a fool and she knew precisely what her situation was. And she had told him herself that a poor woman must take her amusements where she found them and her security where she could get it. She would marry Sir Marcus Vane and be witty at his dull table for 40 years, and slowly, invisibly, that keen, alive face would go quiet. The way a lamp goes quiet and when someone's it down not out, never quite out, but down and down and down. He found he could not bear it. He examined the sensation with something like scientific horror, as a man might examine the first symptom of a disease he had believed himself immune to. He could not bear it. The thought of that light turned down was a physical pain, located somewhere beneath his ribs, and it did not answer to any argument he brought against it. Not duty, not station, not the whole cold weight of Fairmount, not the memory of what softness had cost him once, long ago, at a deathbed. He went to find her. It was late. The house had mostly gone up to bed. He found her at last on the terrace, wrapped in a shawl against the April chill, looking out at the dark garden where the roses were. And he stood a moment in the long window watching the way the light from the room behind gilded the edge of her, and then she said, without turning, "You breathe like a man deciding something, Your Grace. It is very loud. I have been listening to it for a full minute." "Sir Marcus Vane," Adrian said, "means to ask for you at the ball." She was quiet. Then, "I know. He is not subtle. He looks at me the way my aunt looks at a joint of mutton she is deciding whether we can afford. And will you have him?" She turned then, and the light caught her face, and it was not amused and it was not sharp. It was tired, suddenly tired in a way he had not seen, the tiredness of a person who has been brave for a very long time and is weary of the effort. "What would you have me say, Your Grace?" "That I will refuse a baronet of good fortune who offers to make an honest wife of a penniless girl the world has already written off." "On what grounds?" "That he is dull. Half the wives in England are married to dull men and manage to be tolerably happy or tolerably resigned, which comes to the same thing at my age. That I do not love him. Love is a luxury, and I have long since learned to want only things I can afford." Her voice did not break. It was worse than if it had. "I am 29, Your Grace. I know I do not look it. Poverty preserves a woman, there being nothing to spoil. I have no portion, no beauty the world can see, and an aunt who cannot keep me forever and has beggared herself trying. If Sir Marcus Vane asks me, I shall very likely say yes, and I shall be grateful, and I shall hate myself a little for being grateful, and that is simply what it is to be a woman like me. Now, was there something you wished to say, or did you come out into the cold merely to hear me recite the arithmetic of my ruin?" Adrian crossed the terrace. He stopped an arm's length from her, close enough to see that her eyes were bright, close enough to see the pulse at her throat, and every rule he had ever made stood up in him and shouted, and he did not heed a single one. "There is a ball in 3 nights, he said. "The great ball. Half the county. Your Sir Marcus will ask you for the first 2 dances and make his intentions plain before the assembled neighbourhood, and you will be as good as promised to him before the 3rd. So I imagine. I have a proposal of my own," Adrian said, "to lay before you first. A wager, if you like, since you and I have done nothing this fortnight but wager words, mostly, and the occasional rose. But this wager is a serious one, and I will thank you not to answer it lightly, because I do not offer it lightly, though God knows nothing in my life has ever less resembled sense." She had gone very still. The wind moved the dark garden, the shawl slipped from one shoulder, and she did not right it. "At the ball," Adrian said, and his voice was low and steady and entirely unlike the cold, bored voice of the man who had spoken to her in a doorway a fortnight since. "There will be a waltz. The Countess means to shock the neighbourhood with one. She told me so herself, thinking to shock me. Before Sir Marcus can ask you, before anyone can, I will cross that room in front of the whole county and I will ask you for it. And you will refuse me, because you are proud, and because you think this is still a game, and because you would rather die than let the Duke of Fairmount imagine he has only to hold out his hand. And I am telling you now 3 nights in advance, so that you cannot say you were surprised. 1 waltz with me, Beatrice, 1 waltz, in front of them all, and you are mine, not his, not the world's to marry off to the highest dole bidder. Mine. I mean to make you a duchess, and I am done pretending otherwise, and I have 3 nights to persuade you that this is not a game and never was. The silence on the terrace was total. Beatrice Merryweather looked at him as though he had struck her. All the wit had gone out of her face, all the armour, and what was left underneath was the thing his aunt had warned him of, the thing that could be broken once and never mended, terrified, disbelieving hope, the hope of a person who has spent 29 years teaching herself not to. That, she said, and her voice was not steady now at all, is the cruelest thing anyone has ever said to me. And she turned and left him on the terrace in the cold, and went into the house without once looking back. She avoided him for 2 days. It was masterfully done. He had to grant her that, even through the slow grinding misery of it, in a house full of the same 40 people, sharing the same meals and the same drawing rooms and the same interminable evenings, Beatrice Merriweather contrived to be always at the far end of every room from him, always deep in conversation with someone else the moment he approached, always when their eyes did meet by accident across the crush already looking away. She did it without a single visible sign of effort, and no one but Adrian and his aunt noticed anything at all, and the effect on Adrian was that of a man deprived of water who had not known, until it was withheld, how much he had come to depend upon it. "You have frightened her," his aunt observed on the second evening. "I did warn you. What did you say to her on the terrace?" "I asked her to marry me." The Dowager Countess of Selwood set down her teacup with a click. For once in her long and formidable life, she appeared to be at a loss. She recovered herself. "In those words?" "Not in those words. I told her that at the ball I would ask her to waltz in front of the whole county, and that if she danced with me she was mine, and that I meant to make her a duchess and was done pretending otherwise." He heard how it sounded, laid out plainly like that. "She said it was the cruelest thing anyone had ever said to her, and left me standing in the garden." His aunt was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice had lost its customary edge. It was gentle, which frightened him more than any scolding could have. "Oh, my dear," she said. "My poor blind clever dear, do you understand what you have done? You have offered a starving woman a feast and told her in the same breath that she must cross a room full of people who despise her to reach it, and be seen wanting it, and risk everything she has, which is only her dignity, but it is all she has on the chance that you mean it. You have asked her to hope. Do you know what you ask when you ask a person like that to hope? You ask her to hand you the one weapon that can destroy her, and to trust that you will not use it. And she does not trust you, Adrian, because you have given her no reason to a fortnight of clever words and a stolen rose and a proposal that sounds to a frightened woman exactly like a cruel man amusing himself with a poor girl's expense. I was not amusing myself, I know that. You know that. She does not know it, and until she does, your grand gesture at the ball is not a gift, it is a trap. If she dances with you and you meant it, she is saved. If she dances with you and you did not, she is ruined publicly, permanently, the poor girl who threw her cap at a duke and was laughed out of the county for it. You have made her choose in front of everyone whether to believe you. And you have given her nothing to believe with." His aunt rose and crossed to him, and did a thing she had not done since he was a boy. She laid her old hand against his cheek. "If you want her, Adrian, and you do, I have wasted these 2 weeks fall the whole way down, then you must not wait for the ball. You must go to her before quietly, with no county watching and no waltz to win, and you must give thing you have never given anyone since your father died. You must let her see what your coldness costs you. You must let her see you afraid. That is the only coin that will buy you her trust, and it is the one coin you have spent your whole life refusing to spend." He found her the next morning where he had first found her, the library, the window seat, the low gold light, but she was not reading. She was sitting quite still with a closed book in her lap and her face turned to the frost on the glass, and when the door opened she said without turning, "Please go away, your grace." "No," Adrian said. He came and sat down. Not near her, across the window seat, at the other end, an arm's length that felt like a mile, and he set his hat aside, and he looked at his own hands for a while, ungloved, ordinary hands, and he made himself begin. "When I was 9 years old, my mother died. You will forgive me if I do not tell it well. I have never told it at all." He heard her go still, the particular stillness of someone who has stopped even breathing so as not to break a spell. "My father loved her past sense, past reason, the way I did not know a man could love and have thought ever since was a kind of madness best avoided. When she died he did not recover, he simply stopped. He shut himself in the east wing at Fairmount, and he drank and he grieved, and for 9 years he did not, so far as I could tell, feel a single thing that was not pain. I was his heir. I was 9. and then I was 12, and then I was 15, and I learned to run a dukedom because someone had to, and I learned it standing in the shadow of a man who had loved once and been destroyed by it. That was my education, Miss Merriweather. That was what I learned about the heart, that it is a door which, once opened, cannot be shut, and that behind it waits a grief large enough to swallow a strong man whole. My father proved it. He was the strongest man I ever knew, and love unmade him, and he died at last still calling her name, and I stood at his bed. I was 24, and I made myself a promise. I promised that I would never open that door, that I would be cold and safe and whole, and that no one would ever have the power over me that my mother had over my father, the power to end me merely by ceasing to exist. The library was silent. He could not look at her. He looked at his hands. I have kept that promise for 14 years, he said. I have been proud and cold, and I am told, cruel, and I have frightened away every soul who came near, and I told myself it was strength. It was not strength. My aunt named it 2 nights ago, and she was right, as she generally is. It was cowardice. I built a fortress and called it a virtue and lived alone inside it and mistook the silence for peace. He turned and made himself meet her eyes and let her see for the first time in his adult life, let another human being see the thing beneath the cold, which was not cruelty and never had been, but only fear, old and deep and worn smooth as a river stone. And then a girl in a doorway told me my coldness was a costume, and I have not had a moment's peace since. Because she was right, and because the door I swore I would never open has been standing open a fortnight, and I cannot shut it, and God help me, Beatrice, I no longer wish to. Don't, she whispered, don't do this if you do not mean it. I could not. I have borne a great deal, your grace. I have borne poverty and my father's ruin and my whole small, useless life, but I could not bear this, to be given this and have it taken back. So if this is the game still, if this is the cruelest cut of all, tell me now, and I will forgive you, and we will never speak of it, and you will go back to Fairmount, and I will marry Sir Marcus Vane, and neither of us will ever know what this might have been. But if you are lying to me now, her voice cracked clean across, then you are crueler than any man I have ever met, and I will hate you until I die. I am not lying. He said it quietly, and he heard the truth in it himself, the whole solid weight of it. I have never in my life meant anything more. I do not offer you a waltz, Beatrice. I offer you the door. All of it, the grief that waits behind it, the fear I have carried since I was 9, the whole ruinous, dangerous business of a heart I swore I would never use. I am offering you the power my mother had over my father, which is the power to unmake me, and I am doing it with my eyes open, because I have discovered that a life spent safe from you is not a life I want to live. That is not a game. That is the most frightened I have ever been, and I am doing it anyway. Because you were right about that too. I have never run from anything, and I will not begin with you. She was crying now, silently, the tears running down and dropping onto the closed book in her lap, and she was not trying to stop them or to hide them, which he understood, obscurely, to be the greatest compliment she had ever paid him, that she would let him see her weep. Why me? She said. Of all the women in England, why a penniless nobody in a mended gown? You could have anyone. You could have wealth and beauty and land and a name to double your own. Why choose the one woman who brings you nothing, who can only cost you your peers' respect, your aunt's easy match, the whole comfortable arrangement of your world? Why me, Adrian? It was the first time she had used his name. Because you are the only person alive, he said, who ever looked at me and saw a man instead of a duke. Because you told me the truth to my face when everyone else told me pretty lies to my back. Because you are poor and proud and clever and entirely without design, and you want nothing from me, and that is the rarest and most valuable thing I have ever encountered, and I would be a fool of the first water to let it be bought by a baronet for the price of a girl's gratitude. I do not choose you despite that you bring me nothing, Beatrice. I choose you because of it. You are the one thing in my life I did not inherit and cannot be bought and did not have to. You are the first choice I have ever made that was entirely, purely mine. He paused. That is why. For a long moment she said nothing. The frost burned off the glass. The low sun climbed. Somewhere in the house the party was waking, the ordinary business of the day resuming, oblivious. And then Beatrice Merriweather set aside her book. and wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand in a plain, unpretty gesture that undid him entirely, and looked at him with something in her face he had not seen there before, not wit, not armor, not even hope, but a kind of grave, astonished tenderness. As though she were looking at something she had wanted so long she had forgotten it could be real. "Then ask me at the ball," she said, in front of them all. "Cross the room and ask me for the waltz, and I will not refuse you, and I will not care who watches, and let them make of it what they will." A ghost of the old fire returned to her, the smallest curve at the corner of her mouth. "But I warn you, your grace, I dance very badly. My father could not afford a dancing master. If you have fallen in love with my grace, you have made a grave error, and there is still time to reconsider." "I have not fallen in love with your grace," Adrian said. "I have fallen in love with your nerve, which is considerable, and your mind, which is dangerous, and your habit of stealing other people's roses, which is a hanging offense. Your dancing I shall simply have to endure." And Beatrice Merryweather laughed a real laugh, wet and startled, and entirely unguarded, and Adrian Crane, 5th Duke of Fairmount, who had not laughed in a decade, found that he was laughing too. The night of the ball, Ravensworth Hall blazed. Every candle the Countess had bankrupted her husband to buy was lit. The great gallery ran the length of the house in a river of gold, the chandelier crystals throwing splinters of light across 100 faces, the polished floor a black mirror underfoot. The county had come in its entirety, the dowagers in their diamonds, the young ladies in their palest gauzes, the squires and the parsons and the half-pay officers, the whole small ambitious world of that green corner of England assembled under one roof to see and be seen. And through it all moved the rumour, the delicious, impossible rumour that had somehow leaked from the house party into the neighbourhood, that terrible Duke of Fairmount, who had refused every heiress in 3 seasons, had been seen to smile. Adrian stood at the head of the gallery, correct and cold in black and white, a glass of wine he did not drink in his hand, and watched the door. He was aware of the eyes on him. He was always aware of the eyes. It was the price of the title, the constant low pressure of 100 people arranging themselves in relation to your presence. But tonight the awareness had a different quality, because tonight he was about to do a thing that would set every one of those 100 tongues wagging from here to London, and he found, examining the prospect, that he did not care. It was the strangest sensation. For 14 years the good opinion of his world had been a fortress wall. Tonight he was about to walk out from behind it, in front of everyone, for the sake of a penniless girl in a mended gown, and the wall he had thought so essential turned out to be nothing at all. He could simply step over it. He had only never wished to before. Sir Marcus Vane found him near the punch. "Big Knight Fairmount," he said, resplendent and oblivious in a waistcoat of alarming yellow. "Mean to have it settled tonight?" Asked the Merryweather girl. For the first 2 dances she was a bit odd about it, distracted. You know how women are, but she didn't refuse, so that's as good as done. Huh. Wish me joy. He clapped Adrian on the shoulder, a familiarity that ordinarily have earned a man frostbite, and moved off into the crowd, secure in the small warm certainty of his own success. She had not refused him. Adrian turned that over and found, to his own surprise, that it did not trouble him. She had not refused Vane the first 2 dances, because Beatrice Merryweather was too clever by half and too proud to give the county the satisfaction of a public scene before the appointed hour. She was letting Vane have his dances. She was saving the waltz. And then the door at the far end of the gallery opened, and Beatrice came in on her aunt's arm, and Adrian forgot, briefly and completely, how to breathe. She was not the best-dressed woman in the room. She was not even close. The gown was pale grey silk, plainly made, and he recognized it. It was the same gown, the twice-turned gown from the first night, though someone had done something to it, added a fall of lace at the neck that had not been there before, real lace, old lace. The kind a poor aunt keeps wrapped in tissue at the bottom of a drawer for 30 years and brings out only once, for the thing that matters most. Her dark hair was dressed simply, a single strand of small seed pearls threaded through it, and there were no diamonds, no plumes, nothing to compete with the feathered heiresses who eddied around her, and she was, to Adrian's eye, the only woman in the room. She stood in the doorway with her chin at its familiar defiant angle, and she found him across the whole blazing length of the gallery, and something passed between them, silent, that the 100 watching faces could not read, and Adrian understood that whatever happened tonight, whatever came after, he would remember this: the pale grey gown and the old lace, and the way she looked at him across a room full of people who had never once looked at her and saw only him. The dancing began. Vane claimed his 2 dances and had them, Beatrice moving through the figures with the graceless honesty she had promised, stepping wrong twice and not caring, her attention plainly 1,000 miles from her partner, who talked at her the whole while and noticed nothing. Adrian danced with no one. He stood by the wall and watched and waited, and the hour wore on, and he saw his aunt across the room, magnificent in grey silk and old diamonds, watching him with an expression that was, for once, entirely without irony. An old woman watching her last hope come to its hazard, and daring, against all her long experience, to hope. Then the musicians, at a nod from the Countess, laid down the set they had been playing and took up their instruments differently, and a murmur ran round the room, half scandalized, half thrilled, as the first slow 3-4 bars of a waltz stole out across the polished floor. The waltz. The daring, improper, close-held waltz that the older generation still spoke of as an outrage and the younger longed for. Couples formed hesitantly, the boldest first. Several dowagers made a great show of turning away. The Countess of Ravensworth watched her scandal unfold with the delighted terror of a woman who has thrown a stone and cannot recall it. And the Duke of Fairmount set down his untouched glass and crossed the room. He did it slowly. He did it in the full light of the chandeliers, in front of the whole assembled county, and he felt the room felt the ripple of attention swing toward him, the conversations faltering, the fans stilling, the whole glittering apparatus turning to watch the terrible cold Duke walk, deliberate and unhurried, the length of the gallery. He saw Sir Marcus Vane, who had just been moving toward Beatrice from the other side, check and frown. He saw his aunt's hand go to her throat. He saw the Countess's mouth fall open. He saw 100 faces do the arithmetic and arrive, one after another, at the same astonished sum. He is going to the Merryweather girl. The Duke of Fairmount is crossing the room to the penniless niece. He did not care. That was the revelation, walking that endless golden floor with every eye upon him. He did not care what any of them thought, had perhaps never truly cared, had only mistaken the wall for himself. There was only the girl at the end of the room in the grey gown and the old lace, standing very straight, her hand tight on her aunt's arm, her face pale and her eyes enormous and fixed on him, and she was trembling. He could see, as he came near, that she was trembling, but she did not look away, and she did not step back. And when he stopped before her and the whole room held its breath, she lifted her chin the last fraction and met him full. "Miss Merryweather," Adrian said, and his voice, pitched low, carried nonetheless in the sudden hush to every corner of that watching room. He bowed, not the small correct bow of a duke to a nobody, but a full deep bow, the bow one gives an equal, the bow one gives a queen. "Will you honor me with this waltz?" The silence was absolute. He heard, very distinctly, somewhere behind him, a dowager's fan snapshot like a pistol shot. Beatrice Merryweather looked at the Duke of Fairmount, bowing before her in front of the whole county, offering his hand and offering, past the hand, the thing he had promised her in a library 3 days before, the open door. The whole dangerous, ruinous business of a heart, and for one endless heartbeat Adrian did not know, truly did not know, what she would do. She had said she would not refuse him. But she was proud past sense, and this was the crucible of it, the moment made public, and a lesser courage might have failed. He watched her weigh, in the space of a breath, everything she had learned in 29 hard years about the danger of hoping. And then Beatrice let go of her aunt's arm, put her ungloved hand into his, and said, clear enough for the whole room to hear, "The honor, your grace, is entirely mine." The room made a sound, a collective exhalation, half gasp, half sigh, the sound of a great many people watching the impossible happen and being unable, quite, to believe it. But Adrian did not hear it, or heard it only distantly, as one hears weather through a wall, because he had drawn Beatrice Merryweather into the waltz, and everything else in the world had gone very far away. His hand at her waist, her hand in his. The careful, correct distance that the daring dance demanded, which was closer than any English couple stood outside of marriage, close enough that he could see the pulse leaping at her throat and the fine tremor still in her. close enough to feel the warmth of a come across the small space between them like the warmth of a hearth. The music took them, 3/4, slow and turning, and Adrian led her out onto the floor beneath the falling light of 100 candles, and she danced badly, exactly as she had promised, stepping on his foot within the first 8 bars and losing the count within the first 16, and it was, without any exception he could name, the finest dance of his entire life. "You are trembling," he said low, for her alone. "I am terrified," she said, "and I have just put my hand into the fire in front of the entire county, and I have trodden on your foot twice, and if you laugh at me, Adrian Crane, I shall never forgive you. I would not dream of it." He turned her, and she followed, clumsy and brave and wholly his. And he held her exactly as close as he dared and no closer, and the room revolved slowly around them, the watching faces, the gold light, the whispering fans, the ruin of his reputation and the making of hers, and none of it mattered at all. "You have miscounted the time, ruined my boot, and set every tongue in the county wagging until Michaelmas," he murmured. "You are the worst dancer I have ever partnered, and I intend to partner you for the rest of my life. Do you understand me, Beatrice? This is not one waltz. I lied to you on the terrace. It was never going to be only one waltz." She looked up at him, and the terror was still there in her eyes, but behind it, breaking through it like the sun through a hard frost, was something so bright and so unguarded, and so entirely without armor that it stopped his breath. "Then you had better hold on very tightly, your grace," she said, "because I have no idea at all what I am doing, and I am absolutely certain to fall." "I have you," Adrian said, and drew her the smallest fraction closer, and turned her again beneath the blazing chandeliers, and meant it with the whole of the heart he had sworn he would never use. "I have you. I will not let you fall, and for the length of that one waltz." In front of the whole astonished county, the terrible cold Duke of Fairmount and the penniless girl in the mended gown turned and turned in the golden light, and both of them, for the first time in either of their careful guarded lives, entirely and dangerously happy. The days between the ball and the removal to Fairmount were, Adrian would later think, the happiest and the strangest of his life, to that point strange because they were happy. Happiness being a country in which he had spent so little time that he moved through it like a traveller unsure of the customs. The house party broke up in the ordinary way, the guests dispersing to their own homes with a great deal to talk of, and Beatrice and her aunt were to go home to their small hired cottage for a fortnight before removing to Fairmount to prepare for the wedding. And on the last morning, before the carriages, Adrian walked with her in the walled garden where they had once quarrelled over a stolen rose, and found that quarrelling was a habit not easily broken, even by happiness. "You are brooding," Beatrice observed. "I know the look now. You have 3 broods, your grace, and I have learned to tell them apart. There is the brood of a man who is bored, which is your public brood. There is the brood of a man who is thinking about money, which is your ledger brood. And there is this one, which is new, and which I believe is the brood of a man who has gotten something he wanted and cannot quite believe it will be allowed to keep, and is bracing for it to be taken away." She cut a rose, the Countess's rose again. "Some habits are sacred," and handed it to him. "It will not be taken away. Stop bracing. You will strain something." "I am not accustomed to happiness," Adrian said. "I do not trust it. In my experience it is generally the calm before some catastrophe. My mother was happy the week before she took ill. My father was happy the day before the letter came about the debts. I have learned to distrust it the way a sailor distrusts a flat sea. That," Beatrice said, "is the most melancholy philosophy I have ever heard, and I was raised by a clergyman, so I have heard some. Listen to me, Adrian." She stopped and turned him to face her, there among the roses, and looked up at him with the grave, keen tenderness that undid him every time. "Happiness is not the calm before catastrophe. Catastrophe comes whether you are happy or not. It is entirely indifferent to your mood. The only question is whether, when it comes, you will have had any happiness at all to set against it, or whether you will have spent the whole fair weather bracing for the storm, and so have had nothing, no calm. No catastrophe either, just a long grey anxious waiting that is itself the worst catastrophe of all. That is the life you were living when I met you. A long grey waiting. I do not intend to let you go back to it." So you will be happy now this morning in this garden, with this stone rose, whether you have the knack of it or not, and I shall teach you, the way I taught the Ravensworth girls their cards badly at first, and then better, until one day you do it without thinking. Now, look at the roses and be glad, and stop composing your own funeral. It is a beautiful morning, and you are engaged to be married to a woman who is far too clever for you, and those are two facts that ought to make any sensible man content. Adrian looked at the roses. He tried to be glad. It came awkwardly, like a language learned late, but it came a small warm loosening somewhere beneath the ribs, in the place where the fear usually lived, and Beatrice watched him find it and smiled. And it was the smile of a teacher whose pupil has finally, after long labor, played the knave at the right moment. There, she said softly. You see, you have the knack of it after all. I knew you would. Underneath all that armor you were always a warm-hearted man. You had only forgotten, and it wanted reminding, and I am very good at reminding people of things they had rather forget. It is my other besetting sin, along with the presumption. My aunt prays over both. Your aunt, Adrian said, is a saint, and I intend to make her comfortable for the rest of her days, whether she will allow it or not. Something flickered in Beatrice's face, a small guilty flicker that he did not, at the time, understand, and would not understand until it nearly destroyed them. For it was the annuity, the secret settlement she was even then arranging for Prudence Merriweather, the very kindness that Julian would later twist into a knife. But in the garden that morning he saw only the flicker and thought it feeling, and let it pass. You must not spoil her, was all Beatrice said. She has been poor so long that comfort will only alarm her. Come at it gently. They walked on among the roses, and the last of the house-party carriages came and went, and the great world began its slow settling back into place around the extraordinary fact of what had happened at the Ravensworth ball. Word ran ahead of them to London and to the county both, that the Duke of Fairmount was to marry, and to marry not an heiress but a portionless clergyman's niece, a woman past her first youth, plain by the accounts of those who wished her ill, and remarkable by the accounts of those who had actually spoken to her. And the world did what the world does, which was to divide sharply into camps. There were those who thought it romantic, chiefly the young, and chiefly the women, who saw in the story of the cold duke thawed by a poor clever girl, a fairy tale made real, and who wrote to one another about it in raptures. There were those who thought it scandalous, chiefly the old, and chiefly the mothers of unmarried daughters, who saw in it a duke throwing himself away and a fortune hunter triumphant, and who said so, at length, over their tea. And there were those the cannier sort, the ones who understood how the world truly ran, who thought it simply interesting, and reserved judgment, and waited to see what the new Duchess of Fairmount would make of herself, knowing that a woman who could catch a duke of that temper was a woman worth watching, whatever portion. Adrian heard all of it, as one always hears such things, and found that he cared for none of it. That was the great change she had worked in him, greater even than the happiness. She had made the good opinion of the world, which had been the wall of his whole existence, into a matter of perfect indifference. He had discovered at the ball, crossing that golden floor, that he could simply step over the wall, and having stepped over it once he found he could not remember why he had ever thought it so high. The wall had been made of other people's opinions, and other people's opinions, it turned out, were the flimsiest material in the world, strong only so long as one agreed to be bound by them. Beatrice had never agreed to be bound by them. That was the secret of her strength. The thing that had drawn him from the first. She carried herself like a queen in exile, because she genuinely did not care what the exiling court thought of her, and standing next to her, Adrian had caught the freedom of it like a fever, and was cured at last of a lifetime's sickness. His aunt saw the change and rejoiced in it, quietly, in her fashion. You look 10 years younger, she told him, and 20 years less disagreeable, and I have not once in 3 weeks wished to strike you with the fire irons, which is a record. The girl has remade you. I said she would. I am generally right about these things, and it is very tiresome of you all to be so continually surprised by it. You did say, Adrian agreed. You said a great many things, most of them uncomfortable, all of them true. I am beginning to find it a family failing, this habit of being told uncomfortable true things by clever women. Between you and Beatrice I shall have no illusions left at all inside a 12-month. Good, said the Dowager Countess of Selwood. Illusions are for men who can afford them, and you never could. You only thought you could, which is the most expensive illusion of the lot. Now go and be happy and do not brood. And for the love of heaven, when you get to Fairmount, keep that dreadful cousin of yours away from your ear. Because a man does not become happy without becoming, at the same moment, a man with a great deal to lose, and Julian Crane has spent his whole life waiting for you to have something worth taking from you. She said it lightly. She did not know how right she was. Neither did Adrian, who laughed and kissed his aunt's papery cheek and went out into the bright day thinking that nothing in the world could touch him now. It is always, of course, at exactly such a moment in exactly such a security that the world reaches out its hand. The waltz ended. The world came back. It came back in the form of 100 faces and a rising tide of whisper, and Adrian, releasing Beatrice's hand with a slowness that was itself a kind of announcement, found that the county had recovered from its astonishment and passed directly into judgment. He walked her from the floor with her hand upon his arm, and he felt the crowd part before them, and he heard, as one always heard such things, the fragments that were meant to be heard. The Merryweather girl, of all people, no fortune whatsoever, I have it on the best authority. Throwing herself at him, quite shameless, and he a duke, well, it will come to nothing, of course. A man like Fairmount does not marry a nobody. He is amusing himself. That last, spoken by a woman he did not trouble to identify, was pitched to reach Beatrice, and it did. He felt the small flinch travel up her arm into his, felt her steps falter for half a beat before her pride reasserted itself, and she walked on with her chin high and her colour up, and Adrian understood, with a cold and perfect clarity, that this was the hazard his aunt had named, that the waltz which had made him happier than he had ever been had, in the same stroke, exposed Beatrice to a cruelty she could not answer. The whispered certainty of a whole society that she was a grasping poor girl, who had thrown her cap at a duke and would be laughed out of the county when he tired of the joke. He could end the whispers. He knew precisely how. One sentence, spoken loudly enough, would do it. Miss Merryweather has done me the honour of accepting my hand. It sat ready on his tongue. And yet some cold instinct, bred of a lifetime's caution, made him hesitate, not from doubt, never from doubt, but from a duke's ancient reflexive habit of never doing anything of consequence in front of a crowd, of retreating to consider, of controlling the ground before he committed. Was the smallest hesitation. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds, and it was, he understood far too late, the worst mistake of the entire night, for into that 3-second silence stepped Sir Marcus Vane. He was flushed with wine and with the public affront of having been cut out, before the whole county, by the very Duke who had assured him over the port that they were safe from each other. And Sir Marcus Vane, not being an evil man but being a stupid one, and a vain one, and a wounded one, did the thing that stupid, vain, wounded men do. He tried to salvage his own dignity by destroying someone else's, and he chose, because she was the smaller and the poorer and the safer target, to destroy Beatrice. "Well, Miss Merryweather," he said, loudly planting himself in their path, "you're a sly one, and no mistake. Here I've been paying you attentions this fortnight, dancing with you, thinking of, well, no matter what I was thinking of, and all the while you'd set your sights higher on a duke, no less." He laughed, an ugly, carrying laugh, and the crowd, scenting blood, drew in around them. "I don't blame you, mind. A poor girl must look out for herself. But I'll give you a word of advice, free of charge, since you'll get precious little else out of tonight. A man like Fairmount don't marry the likes of you. He's amusing himself, my dear. One waltz to set the tongues wagging, and tomorrow he'll be gone back to his castle, and you'll be right back where you started, only worse. Because now the whole county knows you aimed for a duke and missed. You've made yourself a laughingstock for nothing, girl. I almost pity you. Almost." The gallery was silent. 100 faces watched, hungry, delighted, appalled. Beatrice stood very still beside Adrian, her hand still on his arm, and he felt her go rigid, felt her marshal every ounce of the pride that was all she had. And he knew that in another moment she would answer Vane with something cutting and brave, and would walk from the room with her head high, and would then, somewhere private, in the dark, break because Vane had said aloud the exact fear she had confessed to Adrian on the terrace. The fear he had spent 3 days persuading her to set aside, and here it was made public and given teeth, and no amount of courage could make it not hurt. And Adrian Crane discovered, in that moment, that the cold thing he had been all his life was good for one thing after all. He did not raise his voice. He had never in his life needed to. He simply turned unhurried, and looked at Sir Marcus Vane with the full weight of 100 years of Fairmount dukes behind his eyes, and the temperature of the room dropped 10 degrees. "You will apologize to Miss Merriweather," Adrian said at once, "and then you will leave this house, and you will be gone before I finish speaking, because I find I do not wish to breathe the same air as you a moment longer than I must." He let that settle. The room did not breathe. "You have made 2 errors tonight, Sir Marcus, and I will do you the courtesy of naming them, since you appear incapable of finding them yourself. The first is that you have insulted a lady, and she is a lady, more truly than any woman in this room, though her gown be plainer, and any man who says otherwise in my hearing will answer to me for it. The second, and the graver, is that you have called the Duke of Fairmount a liar and a trifler in front of witnesses. I said I would make Miss Merriweather my Duchess. I meant it. I mean it now. And you have stood there in your appalling waistcoat and told this company that my word is worthless and my honor a joke." Adrian's voice, still soft, had gone to steel. "I could call you out for that, and I would be within my rights, and I assure you I do not miss. But I will not give you the dignity of a duel, Sir Marcus. I will give you instead the thing you have earned. You will leave, and you will be known from this night forward as the man who insulted the Duchess of Fairmount to her face at the Ravensworth ball, and there is not a house in England that will receive you afterward. Now, apologize, and go." It was annihilation, and it was total, and it was accomplished without a single raised word. Sir Marcus Vane went red, then a curious ashen colour, opened his mouth, found nothing in it, stammered out something that might have been an apology and might merely have been a noise, and fled. There was no other word, for it fled the length of the silent gallery and out the door, and, so far as the county was concerned, out of existence. And Adrian turned to the assembled room, the dowagers, the heiresses, the squires, the whole watching, judging world that had, 30 seconds before, been so certain of Beatrice's disgrace, and he said, in a voice pitched to reach every corner, "Since Sir Marcus has been so good as to raise the matter publicly, I will settle it publicly, and spare you all the trouble of speculation." He took Beatrice's hand from his arm and held it, in both of his, in the full light of the chandeliers. "This morning I asked Miss Beatrice Merriweather to do me the very great honour of becoming my wife. This evening she consented. You are the first to know it, and I could not have wished for a happier company in which to announce it. Miss Merriweather will be the Duchess of Fairmount before midsummer, and any among you who wishes to congratulate us may do so. Any who does not may keep his counsel and his opinion, both of which are matters of the most perfect indifference to me." A pause, and then very dry, in the voice she had first heard from him in a doorway a fortnight since. "I would add that she dances abominably, and I intend to spend the rest of my life correcting it. Good evening." There was a silence, and then, because a crowd, like water, will always find the level of its own advantage, and because the good opinion of the county had rearranged itself in the space of a heartbeat around the astonishing new fact of a duchess where a nobody had stood, there was applause. Real applause, gathering the dowagers first, and then the rest, the whole room turning on a sixpence from condemnation to delight, congratulations breaking over them in a warm, ridiculous wave. The Countess of Ravensworth pushing through with tears standing in her eyes and both hands out. Having gotten past all her wildest ambition, a ducal betrothal announced under her own leaking roof. Beatrice stood through all of it with her hand in his, her face very pale and her eyes very bright, and she did not say a word, and Adrian understood that she could not, that the reversal had been too swift and too total for speech. It was only later, when they had escaped at last onto the terrace where 3 nights before she had left him standing in the cold, that she found her voice again, and it was not steady. "You did that," she said, "in front of everyone. You cut Sir Marcus Vane to ribbons and announced our engagement to the entire county and defended you called me a lady, Adrian, in front of women who have cut me dead in the street. Do you know what you have done? You cannot unmake it now. You cannot go home and think better of it. You have burned every bridge behind us both. If you tire of me now, if you change your mind—" "I have burned the bridges," Adrian agreed, deliberately, and with great satisfaction, precisely so that I could not change my mind, and so that you would never again lie awake at night wondering whether I would. My aunt told me 3 days ago that I had asked you to hope without giving you anything to hope with. So I have given you something. I have given you the whole county as witness and Marna as bond, and Sir Marcus Vane's ruined evening as a keepsake. There is no game left to fear, Beatrice. There was never a game. There is only this. He lifted her hand and pressed his mouth to her cold knuckles, there in the dark, with the ball blazing gold behind them and the April night vast and quiet ahead. You are mine. I said it, and I have made it true in front of the world, and it can never now be unsaid. And I have never in my life been so entirely, so recklessly, so foolishly glad of anything. She began at last to cry, but they were not the frightened tears of the library. They were something else. Something that came out of her in a rush, like a dam-giving way. 29 years of holding herself braced against a world that gave her nothing, all of it breaking loose at once now that she was, at long last, allowed to set the weight down. And Adrian Crane gathered the penniless girl in the mended gown into his arms on the dark terrace, and held her while she wept, and found that he was not afraid of the door any more, that it stood wide open, and the grief he had feared behind it his whole life had never come, that there was only her, warm and shaking and real against him, and the astonishing discovery that the thing he had spent 14 years fleeing was not a wound at all. It was home. Fairmount, when she first saw it, did not overawe her, and Adrian, who had braced, without quite admitting it, for the possibility that the great house might frighten her, might make her feel the vastness of the distance she was crossing, found instead that she looked up at the long grey Palladian front with its 100 windows burning in the evening sun, and its terraces and its ancient cedars and its whole weight of centuries, and said only, "It wants flowers. There is not a flower to be seen. Who has been running this place a regiment?" "My father did not care for flowers," Adrian said. "He had the gardens put down to grass and gravel after my mother died. She had loved them. He could not bear to look at them, and so for 30 years Fairmount has had no flowers. I confess I had stopped noticing." Beatrice was quiet a moment, taking that in the grief written into the very ground of the place, the 30 barren years, and then she squeezed his arm, said gently but with the particular firmness he was learning to recognize as the sound of her mind being made up, "Well, we shall put them back. All of them. Every flower your mother loved, and a great many she never had the chance to. This house has been in mourning for 30 years, Adrian, and it is time it came out of black, and flowers are how a house comes out of black. You will see. By this time next summer you will not be able to move for roses, and you will grumble about it. And you will be happier than you have ever been in your life, and you will pretend it has nothing to do with the flowers." And she was right, of course. She was nearly always right, but that was for later. On the first evening she simply walked into the great cold house on the Duke's arm and made it, within an hour, somehow less cold, not by any grand gesture, but by the small keen attentions that were her particular genius. She learned the names of the servants before dinner, which no duchess in the history of Fairmount had troubled to do. She asked the ancient butler about his rheumatism and the housekeeper about her sister in Bath, and the boot boy his name, which reduced the child to speechless adoration, and by the time she went up to dress, the whole below-stairs population of Fairmount had privately and unanimously concluded that the master had done a very good day's work, portion or no portion, and the word ran out to the estate that the new duchess was a lady who looked you in the eye and remembered your name. And that was worth more, in the end, than all the fortunes in England. Adrian watched her do it and understood that he was watching a kind of genius he did not himself possess, and had never valued the genius for the small warm human thing, the remembered name, the noticed rheumatism, the attention paid to the overlooked, which he now saw was the very thing she had done to him in a doorway, the thing that had thawed him, and which she was now doing to his whole frozen house. She had been overlooked her entire life. And rather than growing hard and grasping as such people so often did, she had grown into a person who could not bear to overlook another soul, and there was, Adrian thought, watching her charm the terrified boot boy into smiles, No fortune on earth he would have traded for it. "You are staring, your grace," she said, catching him at it across the great echoing hall. "I am admiring my duchess," Adrian said. "It is permitted. There is a whole section of the marriage service about it, I believe. Or there ought to be. You are not married to me yet," she pointed out. "You have a fortnight still to escape. Many a man has bolted at the church door, and you have more reason than most. You are about to fill your ancestral home with a penniless woman, and a great quantity of roses, and an aunt who weeps at everything, and your relations will never forgive you. And the London wits will make songs about it, and you will be known forevermore as the Duke who married for love, which is the most unfashionable thing a duke can possibly do." "Then I shall be unfashionable," Adrian said, "and enjoy it enormously, and make the wits find a new subject. And I shall not bolt at the church door, because I have discovered that the thing I was running from my whole life was standing still, and the thing I was running toward was you, and a man cannot bolt in two directions at once. I have stopped running, Beatrice. It is the strangest sensation. I have been running so long I had forgotten a man could simply stand in one place and be content. You taught me that, in a card game on a wet afternoon. Do nothing until you cannot help it. I have been doing nothing all my life. I have finally found the thing I cannot help, and it is you." She looked at him across the great hall where 30 years of his family's grief had gathered like dust, and her clever face went soft, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all, and the old butler, passing through on some errand, saw the way the master looked at the new duchess, and had to go and stand quietly in the pantry for a moment, being an old man who had served 3 dukes and never once seen one look at anything as though it mattered. That fortnight before the wedding, Adrian would remember all his life as a kind of golden hush. They rode the estate together in the long light mornings, and she asked him questions no one had asked him in years, not about the rents and the yields, which everyone asked, but about which fields he had loved as a boy, and where he had learned to swim, and whether the old oak by the mill was the one his mother had spoken of. And slowly, riding those familiar lanes beside her, Adrian felt his own childhood come back to him, the years before the grief. The years when Fairmount had been not a weight, but a home. She was giving him back his own past, he realized, the way she was giving the house back its flowers, unburying the warm, living thing that 30 years of cold had covered over. And in the evenings they read together, in the library. In the low lamplight she heard Greek, his eternal ledgers, though he read less and less of the ledgers as the fortnight went on, and watched her more and more, and sometimes they talked and sometimes they simply sat. And Adrian discovered the particular deep pleasure of a companionable silence with a person one loves, which he had not known existed, having spent his whole adult life in silences that were only loneliness wearing a dignified coat. "I used to dread the evenings," he told her one night, over the tops of their books, "the long empty evenings after the day's business was done, and there was nothing left but the hours to be got through until it was decently late enough to go to bed. I dreaded them for 14 years. I filled them with brandy and ledgers and the newspaper, and told myself I preferred my own company." He set down his book. "I did not prefer my own company. I merely had no other I could bear. And now I sit here in the same room I dreaded, with the same lamp and the same fire, and it is the best hour of my day, and the only difference is that you are in it. That is the whole difference. Everything else is exactly as it was, and everything is entirely changed. I do not understand it. I have thought about it a great deal, and I cannot make the arithmetic come out. One person added to a room should not change the whole nature of existence, and yet you do." "It is not arithmetic," Beatrice said softly. "It is not a matter of adding one person to a room. It is a matter of no longer being alone, and being alone and being together are not different quantities of the same thing, they are different things altogether, the way life and death are not different quantities of the same thing. You were living a kind of death, Adrian, a very comfortable, well-appointed death, and now you are alive, and of course it does not come out in the arithmetic, because you are comparing a number to a color. There is no sum that turns grey into gold. There is only the moment the sun comes up." She closed her book and came and sat beside him on the settle, closer than the arm's length that had always been between them in all their doorways and window seats, and laid her head against his shoulder, and Adrian went very still, hardly daring to breathe, holding the moment the way one holds a bird that has landed of its own accord on an outstretched hand. "You are the sun coming up for me, too," she said, very low. "I have been a governess in waiting for so long, Adrian." Bracing for the small cold rooms at the top of other people's stairs. And instead there is this. I do not understand my arithmetic any better than you understand yours. I only know that I was cold my whole life and did not fully know it until I was warm, and now I could no more go back than you could. So we are neither of us going back. We are staying here in this warm room for the rest of our lives, and I dare the whole world to say a word against it. Adrian put his arm around her, there on the settle, in the lamplight, in the house that was learning to come out of black, and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that would not have been smaller than the silence. And for a while they simply sat, the two of them, warm, together, alive while the fire settled and the great old grieving house held its breath around them and, for the first time in 30 years, began very slowly to thaw. It could not last, of course, not the untroubled sweetness of it. Not without one last trial, because the frost of 30 years does not melt without a final hard freeze, a last cruel snap of the old cold. And Adrian carried that old cold in his own blood and shared it with the one man in the world who wished him ill. But that was still some days off. For that fortnight, in the golden hush before the storm, the Duke of Fairmount was simply, wholly, undeservedly happy, and had the wit, this once, to know it, and to be glad exactly as she had taught him to do nothing, and want nothing, and simply be content in the warm room. Until the world reached out its hand. The trouble came, as such trouble always does, from the man who had built the walls in the first place. They were to be married from Fairmount at midsummer, and in the weeks between the ball and the wedding Beatrice came with her aunt to stay at the great house, that she might learn its ways and be seen by its people and become, gradually, the thing she was to be. And it was there, in his own house on his own ground, that Adrian discovered how much of the old cold man still lived in him, and how nearly that man could ruin everything the new one had won. It began with the cousin Julian. Julian Crane was the heir presumptive, the dreadful cousin his aunt had prophesied would gamble the roof off the hall, and Julian, upon learning that the Duke of Fairmount had at last engaged himself to marry, and to marry a portionless nobody who might at any moment furnish Fairmount with a son and cut Julian out of the succession forever, arrived at the hall in a state of considerable and self-interested distress. He was charming, was Julian, in the shallow, practiced way of a man who has lived his whole life on the expectation of another man's death, and he set himself, with a patience Adrian ought to have found suspicious, to be agreeable to everyone, and especially to Adrian himself. And Julian, over the course of a fortnight, dripped poison so slowly and so skillfully that Adrian did not, at first, feel it working. "A love match," Julian would say admiringly over the billiard table. "How I envy you, cousin. To marry where the heart leads, without a thought for all the tedious considerations that bind the rest of us. Fortune alliance, the tenants, the debts, the roofs, you've the luxury of ignoring all that. Most dukes can't. Most dukes marry the estate and the name, but you can afford romance, a rueful, admiring shake of the head. Of course there'll be talk. There's always talk. They'll say you were caught by a clever poor girl who played her cards well, the library, the walks, the waltz, all of it timed just so. Nonsense, of course. I'm sure Miss Merriweather never planned a thing. Only a fortune hunter would, and she's plainly no fortune hunter. Plainly. He would smile. Only forgive me, cousin, it does look a very little like it, from the outside, to a suspicious mind, which mine is not, I promise you. But others, and Adrian, God forgive him, listened. It was the oldest wound in him, and Julian had found it with the unerring instinct of a man who shares the same blood. For beneath the love and the resolve and the burned bridges there lived still, small and cold and patient, the boy of 9 who had learned that softness cost you everything, and that boy heard Julian's poison and whispered, "What if he is right? What if you have been played? What if the clever poor girl, entirely without design, was the most designing of all? What if the very artlessness that undid you was the art? You are a duke. She had everything to gain. You have opened the door and given her the power to unmake you, exactly as you swore you never would. And how do you know, how can you ever know that she is not, even now, laughing at how easily the cold duke was thawed? He knew it was Julian. Some clear part of him knew exactly what Julian was doing and why. But the wound was older than his reason, and it festered, and Adrian, who had been so brave in a library and so bold at a ball, grew, in the last week before his wedding, quiet, and then cold, and then cruel. It came to its head over a letter. Beatrice had a letter from a solicitor, her father's old man of business, settling some last small matter of the ruined estate, and Julian contrived that Adrian should see it lying open, and contrived that a single line should catch his eye, the sum. Once the Duke's settlements are in place, will more than answer. It was nothing. It was, in fact, the solicitor arranging for a small annuity to Beatrice's aunt out of the generous settlement Adrian himself had insisted upon, so that Prudence Merryweather, who had beggared herself keeping her niece, should be comfortable in her old age. A kindness Beatrice had arranged in secret precisely because she knew Adrian would object to being thanked for it. But Adrian, with Julian's poison in him, read the line and saw only the confirmation of his oldest fear. The sum will more than answer money, settlements, a poor girl's arithmetic, laid bare. He said something to her that evening. He was never, afterward, able to remember exactly what he had spent his whole life priding himself on the precision of his speech, and he could not recall the words, only their temperature, which was arctic. Something about not having realized the settlements had been discussed so thoroughly so soon. Something about how convenient it must be to have secured the arrangements before the vows. Something, God help him, with the word arrangement in it, said in the cold bored voice of the man in the doorway. The costume he had sworn to her was only a costume, put on now against her deliberately to wound. He watched it land. He watched Beatrice Merryweather's face, which had grown so open with him these last weeks, close like a door, slammed, watched the armor go back on, the old proud armor she had worn the night they met, and he understood in the very moment of his triumph that he had done the unforgivable thing. The thing his aunt had warned him of on the terrace weeks ago. He had gotten frightened, and retreated behind his title, and crushed her without meaning to, the way a man crushes a moth against a lamp. "I see," Beatrice said. Her voice was very quiet and very steady, and it was the steadiness of a person holding herself together by main force. "You think I planned it? All of it. The letter is about my aunt's annuity, Adrian, which I arranged in secret so that you would not have to be thanked, and which I now bitterly regret, but you have decided it is about your fortune, and there is no fact I can offer that will change a mind that has already chosen what it wishes to believe. Your cousin has been very busy this fortnight. I am not a fool. I have watched him work on you. What I did not know until this moment is that he would win." She rose. She was not crying. She had gone somewhere past crying, to a cold, clear country he recognized, because it was where he himself had lived for 14 years. "You warned me that night in the library. You told me you would get frightened and retreat behind your walls, and I chose to believe you had become a braver man than that. I was wrong. It is my error, and I will not compound it. I release you from the engagement, your grace. You will forgive me if I do not stay for the wedding I am no longer having. My aunt and I will be gone by morning." She walked to the door, and Adrian Crane sat in his own great cold house and let her go, because the boy of 9 had won, because the fear was stronger than the love, because it is always easier to lose a thing on purpose than to risk having it taken. And it was only when the door had closed, and the room was empty, and the silence he had cultivated his whole life closed over him like water, that he understood what he had done, and that the grief he had spent 14 years fearing had come at last, and that he had summoned it himself. He did not sleep. He sat in the dark in the east wing, his father's wing, the wing of the grief that had unmade a strong man, and he saw his whole life laid out plain, the boy at the deathbed, the vow, the fortress, the 14 wasted years, and the single door standing open that he had, from pure cowardice, just tried to slam. And somewhere in the black small hours his aunt found him there, an old woman in a wrapper with a candle, and she did not scold him. She sat down beside him in the dark, and she said only, "Your father lost your mother to death, Adrian, which no man can help. You are about to lose Beatrice to fear, which any man can. There is still an hour before dawn. Do not be the greater fool of the two of you." He went. He caught them at the crossroads in the grey of first light, the hired chaise already loaded, Beatrice handing her aunt up into it, and he came off his horse before it had fully stopped, and he crossed the wet grass to her, and he did the thing he had never done in his life for any living soul. He knelt in the mud at the crossroads in front of the postboys and his own astonished groom. The Duke of Fairmount went down on his knees before a penniless girl in a travelling cloak and looked up at her and let her see the whole ruin of him. "I am the coward you named," he said. "You were right in the library and you are right now, and I have no defense to offer, because there is none. My cousin found the oldest wound in me and worked it, and I let him, because it was easier to believe you false than to bear how much I need you true. I have loved exactly 2 people in my life without armor, my mother, who died, and you, and both times the fear was so great that his voice broke. He let it. I tried to lose you on purpose, so that it would not be taken from me. That is the whole cowardly shape of it. I would rather have destroyed this myself than trust it to hold, and I understand if you go, Beatrice. I have earned your going, but I am kneeling in the road to tell you that I know now what my father knew too late, that the grief behind the door is the price of the love in the room, and that a life spent safe from the grief is a life with no one in the room at all, and I have lived that life, and it is not a life, it is only a very long and very cold and very well-appointed death. So I am asking, not a duke asking a nobody. A frightened man asking the one person alive who ever saw him, do not go. Or if you go, let me come with you, because I have discovered I would rather be poor and terrified at your side than a duke and safe without you. And I mean that, and I have burned the last bridge saying it out loud in a public road, and I am glad. The dawn came up grey and then gold over the wet fields. Beatrice Merryweather looked down at the kneeling duke for a long moment, and the armour was still on her, and he waited and did not hurry her, because he had learned at last the one thing his whole cold life had never taught him, that some things cannot be commanded, only hoped for, and that hoping is the bravest thing a frightened person can do. And then she knelt too. There in the mud, in the gold new light, she came down to his level, and she took his face in her 2 ungloved hands, and she said, not steadily, "You great cold ruinous fool, of course I will not go. I never truly wanted to. I wanted you to come after me, which is a different and more contemptible thing, and I am ashamed of it, and I forgive you, and if you ever let your appalling cousin near your ear again, I shall pour the soup tureen over both your heads at dinner in front of the whole county." A wet, breaking laugh. "I have loved you since the doorway, Adrian. I loved you when I thought it was a game. I have simply been too proud and too frightened to say it, which makes me exactly as great a coward as you, and I think that is why we shall do very well, 2 cowards, holding on tightly, so that neither one falls." "I have you," Adrian said, as he had said in the waltz, and drew her against him there in the mud at the crossroads. "I will not let you fall. See that you don't," she whispered against his shoulder. "I dance abominably. I shall need the practice of a lifetime." They were married at midsummer after all, from Fairmount, in the small grey church on the estate, with the tenants crowding the yard and the Dowager Countess of Selwood weeping without shame in the front pew, and Aunt Prudence beside her weeping harder, and Cousin Julian conspicuously, permanently absent, having been given by his cousin the Duke a modest annuity and the strong and lasting suggestion that he take it to the continent. County came and marvelled, and was won for Beatrice, as Duchess of Fairmount, proved to have a way with people that no fortune could have bought. The same keen unarmoured attention she had once turned on a cold man in a doorway now turned on tenants and dowagers alike, so that within a 12-month the woman they had called a grasping nobody was the most beloved lady in 3 counties, exactly as Adrian had always known she was the cleverest. And the great house changed. The east wing, the grief wing, his father's shut cold tomb of a wing, Beatrice threw open to the summer air and made into a library her library, filled with the Greek and the Latin and the geometry her ruined father had left her. The one inheritance no creditor could seize, and Adrian took to finding her there in the mornings, in a window seat in the low gold light, exactly as he had first found her, and he would stand in the doorway and watch her before she knew he was there, and marvel that a man could be so entirely, so quietly, so undeservedly happy. They had a son in time, and then a daughter, and Fairmount's succession was secure and Julian's hopes were buried, but that was the least of it, the smallest part of what she had given him. What she had given him was the door standing open, and the discovery that behind it was not the grief he had feared for 14 years, but only more of her wit, her nerve, her terrible dancing, her habit of stealing his roses from his own garden and daring him to object. Years later, at some ball or other, in some blazing gallery, an anxious young man asked the Duke of Fairmount, grown gentler now, greyer, but no less formidable to those who did not know him, how a duke could possibly dare to marry for love, with all the world's considerations against it. And Adrian looked across the crowded room to where his duchess stood, still in a plainer gown than fashion demanded, still with that keen, alive look on her face, laughing at something with an old dowager who had once cut her in the street, and he said only, "I did not dare. That is the secret of it. I was the most frightened man in England, and I did it anyway, because there was a woman who saw straight through my coldness to the coward underneath, and loved him regardless, and I could not, having once been seen, go back to the dark." He watched Beatrice look up, across the room, and find him, as she always found him, and the whole cold armoured history of him fell away as it always did, into nothing, into her. "One waltz," he murmured, mostly to himself. "I told her it would cost her everything, one waltz with me, and she was mine. I never understood, and she said yes, that it was the other way, entirely. It cost me everything, and it was the best bargain and the truest that I ever made in my life. The music, somewhen, a waltz." And the Duke of Fairmount set down his glass and crossed the room, as he had crossed it 100 times in the years since the first, and bowed before his duchess in the golden light, and held out his hand. "Will you honour me," he said, as he always said, "with this waltz?" And Beatrice, as she always did, put her hand in his and let him draw her out onto the floor, and trod on his foot within the first 8 bars, and did not care, and neither did he, not in the slightest, not for all the world. He had her. He would not let her fall.